Welcome back to Myth Vision and Paulogia Live. Welcome. We are here to unburden Paul from the troubles that he has experienced. And I realized right before we hit live, Paul, that you read 1,000 pages. I mean, roughly, you read his book,
Yeah,
Gary Habermas's book. You may want to show that for evidence so people
I
can
do.
know
I
that
was,
you.
was actually thinking, 1054. We got the on the evidences.
And
Uh,
that resolves it, right? Or is there three more books or something like
there's
that on
three
a.
more. So actually, just today, the volume 2 went on pre-sale for September, which is like that's way too soon. So now I have to like get another 1,000 pages in September and deal with this one first. But yeah, so he split. For those who don't know, Gary Habermas, a resurrection scholar, well known, I think, in evangelical circles as the inventor of the minimal facts argument. He has spent, according to him, he's self reported that he spent the last 14 years and put in over 32,000 hours on his what he was calling his magnum opus for like a resurrection book. And he ended up, talking to publishers, and they're all like, "Yeah, no one wants a 5,000 page book, Gary. So you gotta split that up." So we split it up into four. The first one, which came out in January, is called The Evidences. So it's his positive case. He's putting forth just the best case, his minimal facts and the support for it, and we'll get into that.
Mhm.
Second volume, which is coming out in September, is called Refutations or something like that, or Responses. It's another 1,000 pages to deal with people like myself, I guess, who have naturalistic or other hypotheses. So it's refutation of other hypotheses. Volume 3, which is what I'm most interested in, is not going to sell well at all, is going to be literally his hard data. So he surveyed 200. He alleges that he surveyed 200 New Testament scholars or adjacent to New Testament scholarship with a long survey. And that third volume is supposed to be just the raw data. That's what I'm frankly most excited about, because you can't, like, he makes these very broad claims about like 75%, accept the empty tomb. But what does that mean, right? When you drill down to it, and is it heterogeneous at all? Like, is there a single skeptic who falls in that camp? Like, I'm excited about volume 3. I'm sure it's going to sell terribly. And then volume 4 is going to be like a devotional life lesson kind of a thing, like just his random thoughts about.
Is it like a pragmatic book in a
I think
way?
it's
Like,
yeah, it's supposed to be how we take it in. Like, I might not even buy volume 4 because it's, unless he convinces me. Maybe at 3 volumes in, I'll be convinced. But yeah, it's
I don't
supposed
know
to
how you
be.
do it.
Well, anyway, and he also had at least 5 staff on the book on with him at the same time. So this was quite an endeavor. And I read it in about 2 weeks, the first volume. And I am now getting myself ready. I had to put it down for a little while, as you can imagine. And I'm now getting ready to do a more formal review on my channel, and maybe some more formal reviews elsewhere. But Derek, you pinged me about this book, and I'm like, I've got it open right now. Why don't we talk about it? Sure.
Yeah. I was like, we've talked about briefly mentioning it about its repetitiveness, of course, but I'm curious to know in the first volume what you as a skeptic ran across, and what did you find that he was doing in this? That is it the same stuff we've been hearing for a while online? Like, what did you hear? Was there anything new that was being brought to the table in your view?
Yeah, anything new? I would say, I mean, here and there would be a different citation that I hadn't seen, but not for a new idea. Like there
Right.
was, I think if you have the Habermas Lycona book, which is on my shelf over there somewhere, the 300 or 400 page one. I mean, it's
Right.
the same facts. This was clearly meant to be a couple things. One, it was meant to be a reference book. It was not meant to be read cover to cover. That much was clear to me, because again, each chapter, it went ahead and repeated things if it needed to make the case just for that one thing. So this could have been maybe 800 pages if it had been intended to be read cover to cover. But I don't blame him. Like, he wanted to have the ultimate chapter on burial, or the ultimate chapter on did Jesus exist, and so in that way, it's a huge reference tome, and maybe not even bad for kind of like a Wikipedia article can be good,
Right.
in that you go and you immediately go to the footnotes and see, oh, well, what's the list of the definitive literature I should read, not the Wikipedia article. I think Gary's book is doing that service. It's like, oh, here's, if you want to be read on burial, for example, you should probably read everyone in Gary's footnotes. So in that way, it's a bit of a service. But I don't think that he intends that everyone's even going to read 1,000 pages, right? I feel like this is one of those books that people want to have on their shelf so that they
Right.
can affirm for themselves that there is good evidence. I think I don't know if your testimony is similar to mine, but so many decades of my Christian faith were sitting in the pew going like, my Bible school teacher and my pastor and all these people, they're telling me that they have the evidence. So
Right.
I'm a busy guy. I'm working on movies. I'm doing other stuff. I'm like, I'm just going to take your word for it that you got the evidence. And if I ever need it, I'll come check. I feel like that's what this book is going to be for. It's like to assure you that if I ever need, to answer a question about James, the brother of Jesus, and his visions, well, then I've got it on my shelf. But it's just more that self-assurance, I think. I've now lost track of what the initial question was. So
No. I'm glad you're venting here.
yeah,
Having therapy.
I am venting a little bit. Yeah,
Your mind was blown. I mean, you have to get this out. We're here for you, Paul. Don't be afraid. Just say what you feel.
well, okay.
Yeah. No, seriously, about the book though, was there, I guess, like you said, it's not addressing the skeptic. It's mainly just kind of giving the person who might have their doubts. But this is not like going to be a case to try and overturn the skeptic or someone who's like overly critical, or is it?
I feel like it's more meta than that. I feel like he wrote it so that if you already are in the faith, he's giving lip service to saying that here's what a skeptical person should think or do, so that as a believer, you're reading this and saying, oh yeah, Gary's really going to get some converts with this one, but again, it's not steel manning the stuff. Let me just talk a little bit about the first chapter and the last chapter, just to kind of, because it relates to this point. So the first chapter is all about just supernatural bias, and it's just kind of saying you shouldn't have a bias against the supernatural, and it's talking about bias in general and admitting that he has bias and all these other scholars have bias. But man, if none of this book is going to mean anything unless you give up that naturalism that you got on your head right now, right? So it's a whole chapter just trying to tempt you to at least let your guard down on naturalism.
Right.
And then the last chapter, inexplicably, is a huge chapter on NDEs.
Wow.
And so it's like, wait, this is a resurrection book. Like, I thought I was done. I got to the end of the middle facts. Now we got a whole separate, almost a whole book just on NDEs, like near-death experiences, for those who aren't in the lingo on this stuff. And so that whole chapter is kind of similar to when Mike Licona debated Matt Dillahunty, and he started the whole debate with the whole thing about flying trash lids. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes, I remember that.
But that was, again, to kind of let the guard down of, well, if I can convince you that the supernatural exists, then all the chapters in between are going to make more sense. But we're acknowledging in the first and the last chapter that we don't have enough, there's not enough resurrection evidence to get you over that hump of naturalism. So we have to go elsewhere. And that's both refreshing, right? Because that's a little bit of a soberness about your own case, is that, well, okay, if you're committed to naturalism, the evidence isn't great. Right. But also just that plea, right? That whole, I feel like it's a bit of a facade. Like if you're even a methodological naturalist, he doesn't ever attempt to accept, why testimony wouldn't be, and maybe that's in volume 2, why testimony wouldn't be possibly mistaken or possibly lying. He just kind of goes with this positive evidence saying, well, we're accepting the Pauline letters at least, at their word.
Right, right.
So anyway,
this whole thing you just described. I mean, I'm thinking about the chasm between drawing the conclusion of an affirmative resurrection and this massive chasm of trying to get someone from somewhere that is not convinced at all, someone like you and me who almost would need, I've gone on record saying at least, what would hypothetically in my mind convince me would be a doubting Thomas scenario in my life, and me being surrounded by 12 family members, or a group of family members, and here in the midst of nowhere, boop, Jesus appears. I physically feel, I know I'm not dreaming. This isn't hallucination. All these things, like, okay, you've done something to overcome my doubt. Thank you for doing that. You did it for Thomas. Why can't you do it for me? I've kind of pointed this out to others.
right.
But what I find interesting is near-death experiences, or they try to go to miracle accounts, somewhat contemporaneous and things, to get you to think maybe there's stuff going on. And then they try to hold your hand to pull you to their conclusions. And I find that ironic because I'm doing documentaries right now that are like taking the sources that are really well-established sources from a scholar named Wendy Cotter's book, and it places the miracles, exorcisms, and things like that in their historical context before, during, and after the time of Jesus from other figures.
Oh,
From
fantastic.
gods and heroes, Isis, Heracles, Asclepius, Vespasian with healing miracles and such, Apollonius of Tyana, Pythagoras. These are philosophers, and some of them are kings, and some of them are just normal humans who become gods when they die, according to their own stories, just like Jesus becomes a god. Anyway, so I try to give this level playing field, and so like at the end of the day, he's just trying to get you to at least think it could be. And I think, would you agree that many who are doing this kind of apologetic, when I bring up these comparisons, and I'm known for that, I do the walk like a duck, talk like a duck thing, and they get annoyed and they're like, that doesn't do anything. Just because there's correlation doesn't mean causation, things like that. I get it. That's true. But when I look at it, I'm like, it looks like it's doing very similar things as this genre that we can establish is either fable, legend, myth, whatever you'd like to call it, in birth narratives, in death narratives, and just miraculous deeds that the other people are doing. It looks very much not identical, but similar in nature. How do we know this one's true and that one's not? And it should level the playing field out in terms of, you would think, and not special plead one over the other. You would think, I would think. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I definitely am with you, and I've had, I think, a journey. I think both of our journeys on all this has been like all around the map. Is, oh yeah, it definitely was inspired by the Greeks. Well, maybe they just knew about it like at school. Like I think I'm open to. I think my current model is that the Gospels were probably a combination of kernels of historical truth, legendary development, finding prophecy in the Hebrew Bible to connect to, and then the culture, what we would call the cultural influences of the day, right? So the Homeric epics and like everything that they learned in school. And I feel like if a model probably should encompass like all four of those, right? Like there's probably kernels of all those things, because no literary work is directly inspired. Even like Lion King, which is Hamlet. Well, but it also brings in other things, right? So, anyway, that's my thoughts. Gary avoids a lot of that because he wants to have his cake and eat it too in this book, because he wants to do minimal facts, which can avoid the Gospels entirely. For those of you who don't know the minimal facts argument, it's a couple of, and I guess we can go through what the facts are, but they're drawn not on the Gospels, but on Pauline letters and then external history. But then he has a whole back third of the book saying, but I do think the Gospels are reliable though. Like it's almost like a polemic against the McGrews, for
Mm.
several chapters, because he goes through each gospel, including the Gospel of Thomas and a few of that, and he definitely uses the Gospel of Hebrews to defend a few things. So he he wants to have he wants the first half of the book is like, I only rely on Paul because that's all the skeptics will give me. But
Okay.
then also the Gospels are true. So he has to do a little bit of a shell game with exactly what you spoke of, because he wants to say, well, no, the Gospels can be reliable even though they have supernatural things, because, hey, the biography of Caesar, for example, has ghosts and other weird things in it, right? So
Mhm.
you consider that historical. So the Gospels should also be historical, but he never comes around to realizing, no, but we all reject the weird parts, right? Like
Right.
that's how we do that. That's how historians do it. We say, yeah, the ghosts and the visions, those we ignore, and the battle we pay attention to. So it's a little bit of shell game, hand waving to, as I said, have his cake and eat it too, I think.
So this is an interesting observation I think you and me both could agree on. And the the person who already accepts the worldview that there are ghosts or demons or Jesus can rise from the dead, walk on water, or whatnot, when I do this comparative mythology thing and I show primary sources in antiquity before, during, and after the time the gospels are being written, and that gives that window of like 50 years, because you could talk to one critical scholar that says Mark's written, let's say, 70, and I'm
Yep.
saying critical scholars. I know there are
Yep.
some more evangelical types who want to push it into the 40s, some really really odd numbers, I would estimate, like, in my view.
Yep.
I'm convinced by internal reasons as well as to why it sounds like they're aware of the temple's demise uh on the horizon. Like, so of course they say that's because you deny the miraculous claim of the revelation of the text, and that he really did see that was going to fall. I tend to see as ex event to literary works. But anyway, I don't want to get caught up too much in that. Just to point out, I can go and find and document everything under the sun. Let's just say I did find everything under the sun that there is, that we have, of heroes, mortals, gods performing miracles, exorcisms, birth narratives with gods mating with their mom. And in some cases, as Plutarch talks about Plato, the god did not sleep with his mother. His mother, it was through the pneuma. Plutarch literally
Mm.
uses the same language as Luke. The pneuma and dynamos, the power and spirit that
Hmm.
impregnated Plato's mother in order to have this divine demigod named Plato, the philosopher, be born. And this is in Plutarch. So my point is I could do all that. And I want to talk about perception, just to throw this at you, because you and Shannon love the brain stuff, and I do too. Thanks to y'all. You've really inspired that in me, is to say, notice that all of that evidence to them just makes them go, see how much more plausible there's this like superstitious world that people, you're saying is superstition. We say this is evidence leading toward things are happening. Don't you see? And I'm finding that most of it is either superstitious, in the sense that, look at modern people who have experiences of Elvis or Tupac after their death. The list can go on of
Yep.
things. My loved one visited me. He's been dead for 5 years, whatever. They might believe that literally happened. I tend to think it's psychological, mental. There's something else there. And of course, we can get into that. But the other aspect is to me, genre. So a lot of the stuff you can categorize. And why put a historical what actually happened? This is the question I would pose. Love to have you just freestyle and vent and ramble wherever you want with this. But why put this historical, what actually happened with Jesus, in a similar bracket and category that's framed up to look very much like the other figures that we would, all classicists would say, it is legendary embellishment that never happened historically? And we all agree there is no apologist classicist that I'm aware of on planet Earth that says Suetonius and Lives
Right.
of the Caesars
Yep.
actually had portents leading up that actually caused the Senate to say no child should be born this year. Apollo birthed him through his mother. She had a sign of a serpent on her hip in a tattoo form, so she never went to bathe in public again. An eagle stole his bread and then realized who he was and brought the bread back to him and said, hey, I'm sorry, like, drop the bread back for the kid. Like, and on and on and on. We don't accept that. Are there kernels of possible verisimilitude in historical nuggets? Probably. They're real places, real things. There are people who had this idea that if lightning struck this or if the birds went that way, they believed things and omens. So anyway, I threw a lot at you, and I'm going to walk away for 2 hours, and I'm sure you have plenty to
Yeah,
say.
that's all right. No, I'm with you on all that. I think again, what I'm not well enough versed on all the literature from the
Right.
first and second century to be able to say it's definitely this genre or that genre. But the goal of those four books is absolutely to win converts. Far like that is they prioritize um, being evangelical over historical reporting. That much is clear.
Mhm.
And that is not what a straight up historian does. Like a straight up historian, while maybe issuing some propaganda of one kind or other, but isn't trying to get you specifically to change your life. And so I don't know. I've yet to be super convinced that there is an are analogous, perfectly analogous works of the time. I
Right.
don't know if you would agree with that or not,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. I'd say there's no Xerox copy of everything that is going
yeah,
on around. There are, I would say, tropes. There seems to be themes. There seems to be some setting in the cultural, historical, and literary world at the time in which influence is happening, whether it's in the air, if it's being taught at school, as you talked about earlier, things like that. Is that what you're getting at?
yeah, that is what I'm getting at. Like even all the Greek literature and all the Greek gods, like that would have if you're learning to speak and write Greek, you're definitely reading the Greek classics. Like that's just
Mhm.
would have gone hand in hand. So there's no it's much like going to film school. And maybe you're not directly influenced by Star Wars and The Godfather, but just saw Star Wars and The Godfather if you went to film school, right? So
Right.
so whether or not you're deliberately pulled it out when you were doing your work and referenced it or not, it was in your psyche. So I definitely feel like there were tropes and expectations that these gospel authors fulfilled. And I think you would agree.
Absolutely. I just thought it was interesting to bring up that observation that we
Yeah, for
see it
sure.
and we go, okay, if we grant the supernatural world getting over Gary's first chapter and go,
Yeah.
okay, cool, cool, cool. Let's just say something could be going on and we're just ignorant and we just don't know. And we haven't seen it. We're not convinced. And I list all these other sources that have been around for centuries. There are stone inscriptions, to give you an example, of actual accounts of supposed miracles done by Asclepius all throughout the Greek and Roman world, literally all the way down into the time of Paul. I have an expert scholar, Christopher Stanley, who is like, he specializes on Paul. And he talks about Paul's churches, which would have been Gentile churches, not saying there weren't Jews who associated, but mainly Gentile churches, when they got sick, where did they go to get healing? Because this scholar says in Paul's letters, he doesn't find healings. He's not seeing like what we see in,
Oh,
in
right. Yeah, you're
in the
right.
book of
Yeah.
Acts. It's not like, here's a handkerchief, Bob. Oh my God, my eyes are back, very fanciful sounding the way that Acts portrays it. And so he said they'd go to the Asclepius temple. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting because they're kind of the doctor of the day. And that god, Asclepius, has so many accounts of miracles, healings, etc. For us, why can't Asclepius be the true son of God? Or like, why isn't the Greek pantheon the one at this point? I mean, we can build a case to show they have several claims and beliefs of this in antiquity for millennia. I mean, these myths and stories are floating around, and there are claims about these gods healing people. Well, those are true then. Well, no, they're not true. And that's why I think I've been guilty of saying, you guys are special pleading.
Yeah.
And they don't like that because, like, no, we're not special pleading. Each source matters. We need to investigate, interrogate the sources, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just this hot soup of chaos.
And I think that's why Gary, well, I mean, his story is that he started this minimal facts because his PhD was from a secular university, and I've forgotten which one. Um, and his advisors were like, you can go ahead and write your dissertation on resurrection if you want, but we don't accept the gospels, so good luck.
Ooh, you think that's
And
what
that
influenced minimal?
he's been on record that that was what influenced. Like, so he had to write his PhD dissertation on resurrection without referencing the Gospels, and therefore he kind of came up with. Should I read the minimal facts?
Yeah,
Would that
yeah.
be a thing that we should do? All
I
right.
think it's fair. You've brought it up.
So Gary, throughout the last 14 years, when he gives different interviews, and he admits this, sometimes he has like 12 facts, sometimes he has like 2. So he goes back and forth. But for the book, the magnum opus, he decided to go what he calls 6 plus 1. So number 1 is Jesus died due to the effects of Roman crucifixion. Okay. Number 2, the disciples afterward reported experiences that they thought were actually appearances of the risen Jesus. That's both true and also the one I have the biggest problems with. We can cycle back if we want. Number 3, these experiences accounted for the disciples' lives becoming thoroughly transformed, even to the point of being willing to die for their belief. Number 4, the proclamation of Jesus' resurrection and appearances took place very early, soon after the experiences themselves. Number 5, James, the brother of Jesus and a skeptic before his conversion, most likely believed after he thought he saw the risen Jesus. And number 6, just a few years later, Saul of Tarsus also became a Christian believer due to an experience that he concluded was the appearance of risen Jesus to him. And then the plus 1, the private tomb in which Jesus was probably buried was discovered to be empty shortly after his death. So he calls that a plus 1 because his criteria for the facts are that he wanted to have it be 90% accepted by scholars. And not only that, because it's not pure argument from authority, and that he can back it up with evidence, or so he says. That's what his criteria are. Empty tomb at best raises to about 75. He thinks he has a ton of great evidence for it, but these stubborn skeptics don't accept it, along with the people who have signed a statement of faith. So that's why he couldn't quite include it as fact. Go ahead.
Does he say, the people he's saying are scholars and are not? Like, does he distinguish between those who are making statements of faith? I'm not saying we should then just discard them, but I think
Of
it's
course.
important to understand here at this university, these scholars have statements of faith, which would then entail, in your view and my, I suspect, some psychological reasons to have limitations on how far you can venture or publish if you found contrary evidence to what your statement of faith is kind of postulating for you to even have employment. You see what I'm trying to get?
That's why I brought it up. Absolutely. It's very tough to convince someone to believe something that goes counter to their paycheck. Like, that's just a thing.
Right.
When I worked for Apple, it was definitely like, yeah, I thought iPhones are the best. Right? It's like, just that's the way it goes. I still do, but my livelihood doesn't count on it. That will be book 3. So book 3 is where he's supposed to be publishing the raw data. So in this one, I have my "For the Bible Tells Me So" jingle that I often use. I feel like the theme of this book is "For Bart Ehrman Tells Me So." So anytime he gets into a weird spot, and this is what I'm working on documenting now, is he kind of just appeals to, well, if Bart Ehrman agrees with me on this, I don't have to say any more. So,
oh my God. Did you hear my interview with Richard C. Miller when we were talking about this? And, Richard appreciates Bart's scholarship, of course.
yeah.
He respects him as a colleague, as an academic. But he came up with a funny term in the midst of that. He said, I call this argumentum ad Bartum.
That is what's happening in this book. I love it. Argument about, because he feels like, well, if I can cite Bart agreeing with me, I don't got to provide any other evidence, because of course he disagrees with me on the conclusion. So if there's any given point, and I feel like that's a real weakness in this book, is it, if you are like, there's YouTubers like Inspiring Philosophy or Testify or whoever that are kind of like, we don't buy anything Bart Ehrman says.
Right. Or some things. Right.
Or some things.
Yeah, because I know IP agrees with his view on
Oh,
Revelation.
sure, absolutely.
So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But if you're the kind of person that says, well, just because of enemy attestation,
right,
that's not like buttoning it up. Now I happen to agree more. I don't agree with Bart on everything for sure,
Right.
but more often than not, I do. But I feel like Gary's just really relying on argumentum ad partem, which I'm not going to adopt as an awesome phrase.
Yeah,
I will credit you, Richard, when I do that.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing you do that because I know that happens a lot. That happens a lot because let's be honest, he's a maverick in the field and a
Sure.
brilliant man, and he's brought a lot of a lot of ideas to the public eye. And his debates with evangelicals and other academic, well, mainly I would call them evangelical academics because there's people like James White. He's
Oh,
gone
sure.
and debated other people,
Yep.
but I figure it's the best time to let you shine because you have dealt with minimal facts for a while and you've actually come up with your own particular hypotheses. Did you want to present that or did
I
you have any?
wouldn't mind. We can if the audience is interested, we can do that. I've now since dubbed my hypothesis the minimal witnesses hypothesis. So it has a name now, minimal witnesses, so that people can shorthand it. Hopefully it will spread a little bit. The notion being there's a huge challenge both in this book and by J. Warner Wallace and Frank Turek. It just constantly comes up. The academics, the scholars like Bart and others, and Dale Allison and whoever, they refuse to put forth a naturalistic hypothesis. They just say, we don't know what happened. And they view that as a weakness with these other scholars, right? That they're not putting forth a positive claim on their own side. And so myself, much like you, although I think you're more learned than I,
No, don't.
we're in this position where we have we don't have to worry about our intellectual scholarly career just yet. So we can actually put forth positive claims. And hey, if someone pokes holes in my positive claim, no sweat. You debunked a YouTuber, I will readjust. Life will go on.
Mhm.
But I got really tired of them trying to use this to bludgeon, saying, well, there is no naturalistic hypothesis. So yes, I've put forth my own, and we can I don't know if I can present or if you have to
Absolutely.
present.
Let me pop that up here. Hit the like button, everybody. And here we are.
So it's 13 or so quick sentences. So hopefully it'll go quick. But like any, unfortunately, it's not this hypothesis where you can just say one sentence and that's what it is. You can't just say hallucinations. So anyway, I'll try and go through it quick. But it's a large case because there's a lot of data to cover. So the first thing, and we can discuss them if you like, but the first assertion is that Jesus was a historical figure who was a failed apocalyptic prophet.
You and me agree.
We agree.
I mean, I can't prove without a doubt, no, but let's just go with what our opinions on this. And
to be fair, I have had both Bart Ehrman on my channel and Dale C. Allison both on my channel. I've walked them through this, and they have both given me A's. They don't agree across the board, but they feel like these platitudinal sentences I can back up if I need to. So
let's do this. Okay, just to pause for our audience's interaction. Give a B, C, or D. I guess. F. Let's let the audience give us A, B, C, or D, or F. Let's go with the F after a D.
F for fail.
As in, like you fail.
Yeah.
And let's have you grade Paul here right now.
Let's do it.
So the first one, you think historical Jesus, failed apocalyptic prophet.
Yep.
I know my mythicist might give you an F here, but go ahead.
Fair enough. But also, I just want to keep in mind, this is in the purpose of, I'm not saying this is what happened, but I'm saying this is a coherent naturalistic hypothesis, right? So that
you're not even saying this is exactly what happened.
Yeah, this doesn't have to be the one, but I'm just saying a naturalistic hypothesis can be put forth. So let's see. Jesus said or did the wrong thing to the wrong people and got himself crucified by Romans. I feel like that is well attested to. And so I'm not trying to say why, but he was killed. That weekend, Jesus's body was treated the same way most crucifixion victims were treated, and it was put into a tomb, or not a tomb. It was disposed of in a way that was not remembered. So that could have been left on there to rot and eaten by dogs. That could have meant trench ditch graves, which is actually what most happened. The Romans sometimes would set them on fire, if the Sanhedrin did it, the Sanhedrin had two separate graveyards where the criminals had to be buried, and per Joni Magnus, those were unmarked, right? So the conceit is that whatever happened to Jesus' body, the next day no one remembered. Jesus probably did have a number of followers, possibly 12, possibly more, but those all but two completely disappear from reliable history. There's no reliable history for any of those 12 past what happens in the first couple chapters of Acts for anyone but John and Peter. We just don't. We have no idea. It's very plausible that Peter, who very much beloved Jesus, had some kind of experience that he interpreted as risen Jesus. A good candidate is post-bereavement death. That up to 14% of the public, not people with mental illness, not people who are known, just people who are grieving. 14% of people grieving have at least one mode of seeing that person again. So it's not implausible to think that Peter and Peter alone had such an experience. At some point, Peter's enthusiasm caught on to John, because we know that John was around when Paul was around, and James, the brother of Jesus. Now, Shannon and I have done whole streams on James, the brother of Jesus. That's a whole weird thing, but social contagion of some sort, and or maybe he was a greedy guy, and or maybe he just wanted to be good with his mom. There's lots of good psychological reasons why James might have wanted to jump on board, but they're on board. Stories about Jesus started to spread, and every time they were told slightly differently, and they were told in such a way to be evangelical in nature. So the stories that were most repeated were the stories that won converts, and when there was resistance, they invented polemics, included that next time, and it won more converts. It's like evolution. These stories evolved. Some years later, Paul of Tarsus had some kind of experience that he felt was the risen Jesus as well. So there's two people who felt like they had an experience. Paul, if you need to know, well, why, Paul was clearly seeing visions all his life and weird stuff, but a good explanation may well be if he was getting Christians killed. It's well documented. Post-traumatic stress will often create hallucinations like this. People will do 180s, complete 180s on different causes based on post-traumatic stress. So that's a candidate. I'm not saying that's what it was, but something happened to Paul. Paul eventually met Peter and John, so we know that they talked. Sometime later, and I talked about this earlier, so I won't repeat it, but the people who never met Jesus, who spoke in a language they didn't speak, who were literate, created gospels. I think they had the four, we already talked about it, the four different inspirations. After this, some Christians were persecuted, but not for what they believed. The Christian arrests were for disrupting the peace, generally. Almost always they were for being a menace in some way, almost never because of what they believed, until centuries later, until like 300 AD. So, but yada yada, some centuries later, Constantine has his own vision, becomes a Christian, Christianity is eventually legalized, and from there, we kind of know the story of how the church exists. So, all we need, literally all we need for hallucinations is two people to have had an experience, Peter and Paul. The group experiences, those aren't part of the minimal facts. All we need, these two guys, minimal witnesses, Peter, Paul, and we have Christianity today. So that's the very short version. Probably not as short as you would like, but that's so grade me, I guess, does that. And my challenge is constantly to apologists, what data am I not accounting for with this series of events. So minimal witnesses. I'm not saying it is what happened, but I feel like it does cover all the data. I think you're muted, maybe?
Yes. Give us your final grade, everybody, on the overall thing.
Mm,
Something that I like what you said that came to mind was the idea of persecution. Of course, a lot of these we're not certain about a bunch of stuff, but I do wonder if there is some form of resistance in terms of worshiping, or the Roman imperial cult with the Christians not wanting to worship a man in maybe the early second century, or at least it seems that that could be an influence. The book of Revelation seems to hint at stuff like this. So I'm wondering if that plays a role. That has no bearing on the
right.
overall, natural push. But when you were
But on
talking
that, I
centuries,
kind of rely on books like Candida's book
right,
and or Bart's book, and even um, I'm going through Dominion with Tom Holland, for example, and like some of those, and it sure seems like the cases we can say are solid cases. We're not in a like recant your theology type things.
right,
They're like, oh, the ones we know of, you came into the temple, you came into the town, and you were screaming and you were shouting, or you were, staging a protest. Like, it seemed the well documented cases. I don't dispute that probably Christians had to kept their mouth shut a little bit because their neighbors are all praying to the weather gods and they aren't. So you don't want to be the one guy on your street that's not praying to the weather god. But I don't think we don't have
yes,
we don't have solid records that caused people to die. And again,
yeah, yeah, I get it.
none of that matters, because I don't think, so I shouldn't say none of that matters. That absolutely matters. All persecution is terrible, and it sucks that it happened. I usually go into that a little bit more. That,
Right.
like, it's awful that it happened, but it's not on the scale that is sometimes promoted.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree with you. The
but
way you worded it was good though, breaking the peace. So
yeah,
I guess the only thing I would say is, was it centuries later? Christians are already viewing themselves in the literature as if they're being persecuted, and you have martyrs and such that are writing and stuff. So some stuff is going on, but is it their antisocial stance among the known world that causes them to be viewed? It's like if I walk into a room where I know they have a particular law, a particular standard, but I go contrary to that law or that standard purposefully as part of my ideology, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. And so, anyway, it was just an offshoot. But
yeah, no, I
I'm
get it. And I guess all I would add there is that if the rest of my hypothesis is correct, that persecution could have started and been completely ubiquitous
right,
even right away, because really there were only two witnesses. So it's not like anyone recanting under those or they weren't in a position to know. Like the
right.
apologists sometimes want to say, well, they were all in a position to know and they were all getting persecuted. It's like, well, that's not what the evidence shows. Like, even Sean McDowell has recently even downgraded downgraded 4 ones to 3 because, well, I love to hear him say it. Acts maybe isn't good enough to hang our hat on, for James, son of Zebedee, his martyrdom.
That's
So
awesome. The
yeah.
one comment I think I heard you interviewing Bart, because for those who don't know, me and Paul, we're doing all sorts of scholarly interviews and stuff. And you put this hypotheses even quicker, of course, in front of Bart.
Yeah.
Bart graded you. What did he give you again?
He gave me an A-,
Okay.
because, and someone left a super chat in here.
Oh, did they? We're going to get
I
into
don't know
those soon.
if you can. Anyway, but Bart, he disagrees with me. He thinks Mary Magdalene was involved.
That's what I was going to actually bring up that I thought was interesting about Delcy Allison Jr.'s book on resurrection.
Yep.
He hangs his hat on this early tradition. He thinks that Mary Magdalene, had a much more prominent role in the church, and that she might be an early witness, because some of the gospels seem to hint at this. And so Bart seems to echo what Allison's hinting at. But for me, the get around this, when you go to 1 Corinthians 15, this supposed earlier source that is
Right.
reflecting,
Yep.
there's no women mentioned at all. And of course, Allison's kind of jab was, Well, Paul and the early church were very male centric. But if they were so male centric, then why did they even have to have her as a witness in the Gospels to begin with? My point is you, the same attack to 1 Corinthians 15 could be used on the Gospels and say, yeah, well, they're all male centric. Therefore, why is she a witness here? But it doesn't make the account earlier in 1 Corinthians 15. Didn't cut it for me.
I also feel like Occam's razor just doesn't need her to be a witness. Like again, I feel like all the data that's actual. Like I've asked Bart this, like, well, what data is unexplained if I leave, Mary Magdalene off? It's like I don't know. I just feel like she was. And it's like, well, okay, that's not by Occam's razor, we're multiplying entities at that point. Like we're multiplying witnesses. So and again, I've studied these burial accounts in depth because I've been doing this big chapter on burial, and man, it's so weird the way the women would get there, and why would they be going if indeed John is correct, and they had a ludicrous like 75 pounds worth of spices in John,
Right.
And they were watching from afar. Why are they bringing spices the next day? What did they expect to find? And if I'm right that they wasn't in a place, if it wasn't buried in a place where they could remember, then how is this even going to happen? So that's kind of why I leave Mary out. I don't see the explanatory power of having her there. So I could be wrong, but yeah.
I know that one of my friends, Dr. James Tabor, takes a position that he takes the burial as historical, and he thinks that they, after the Sabbath was up, the Friday night to Saturday night, they moved the body to a new, without saying anything to the rest of anybody, and the body is moved. Now, apologists try to come back and go, wouldn't they have just pointed over to where they put him? I mean, by the time they would have probably even gone to some of the authorities, and if you say the Jewish community were the ones reburying it, as the Gospels seem to hint that the Jews themselves were part of this in some way, then do you think that these people who are probably not fans of the followers of Jesus are actually going to go and talk to them? But I think James, and I don't want to put words, I could be wrong here, so forgive me if I'm mistaken, but I think he jumps to another early non-canonical text that actually hints that the disciples, these early followers of Jesus, actually hid for a week in fear of their lives and did not come around. So there's no reason to establish, that they're right there the next day, just showing up, and everybody's like, where did he go? And all that. They're all hiding for fear of their life because their guy just got slaughtered. So are they really going to show up when Rome would have probably squashed any type of potential threat and followers of that potential threat if they were around, instigating anything that could potentially lead to a revolt or this kind of stuff? So if we hypothesize historicity in that kind of angle, it's interesting to take that angle. And then there's the other side, legendary.
There is. Now I want to have a chat with James on air just about this, because
exactly
it doesn't make sense. Why, if the Sanhedrin was involved, in order to get the bodies down by, like, I don't even care when. I don't care when. It's who did it, and if it was the Sanhedrin who did it, including Joseph of Arimathea, right? The rules are you got to go in the criminal's graveyard. So there were no stone-cut tombs in the criminal's graveyard.
But let's just make the exception based on the gospel. I'm pushing back for fun.
Yeah, no, but that's fine. But I guess if Joseph, if you went ahead and if you were scrambling at nighttime, to get it down before sundown, whatever, that's reasonably okay. But the place where it's going to end up,
right,
is definitely the criminal's graveyard. I guess that would play into what James is saying.
It still would work.
Oh, right. because James is saying, he's agreeing with me that
right.
The final destination is unremembered.
Yeah, they don't. The disciples don't know where it was put, and therefore the legend could easily develop, especially when you take in Richard C. Miller's wonderful work, Resurrection and Reception, which I've mentioned. And by the way, he's referenced by so many academics in the field. Of course, Dennis MacDonald, Robin Faith Walsh talks about this. He's the guy who mainly really started putting this idea out there more and more about it is a well-established trope in Greek and Roman sources that when the body goes missing, that person became a god. And
Mm,
you see this with Alexander the Great trying to purposefully drown in a river
right.
to escape, right? Where he's a god now. Like, and then there's stories that his father Zeus, etc. But this happened over and over, and I hypothesize back and forth in my head because none of this is concrete, and we have to, based on what we're reading and how we would look at this and historical examples. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, even the idea that the disciples stole the body is plausible. I'm not saying that's the
Mm,
likelihood. It's
mhm,
plausible. And I had Christians get kind of upset at me who said, well, why would you say that? Like they thought I said that Matthew's gospel said the disciples stole the body. Matthew
mm,
doesn't believe that, whoever this author we call Matthew is. He's
yep.
saying that there was a rumor, even to his day, of Jews saying the disciples stole the body. Now, if you know anything about that missing body, they became a God motif, and you know you're employed making good money going door to door or whatever, you have a cult following and you believe it. You're so absorbed in sunk cost fallacy, the whole nine. What's stopping you from postulating that they did? But Derek, why would they go to die? You're reading into the motives that maybe their motives are, hey, I have to stand my ground. How many people died for things they were wrong about or purposely did? I mean, there's so many other questions that can come
No,
up.
but that goes back to my minimal witness thing, though, is how many. This is my big problem with Gary's book. He plays fast and loose with the word disciples
Hmm.
because what he has scholarly assertion for is that some disciples saw this, but when he states it as minimal facts, he just says disciples. So you're immediately thinking, well, scholars must think all 12 did this. No, and what Gary will affirm, you have you have Peter and Paul. Well, Paul wasn't there, right? Paul was after. So the death that we care about is Peter's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and James brother Jesus, but again, not one of the initial 12, right? So even
Right.
on what you were saying, like, well, if the disciples stole it, okay, great, but only Peter died for it,
Right.
and we don't know, we have no idea if he was given a chance to recant, right? Like that wasn't we don't know if he could have saved his life by saying no. So I know I'm saying, I'm affirming what you're saying, and it kind of dovetails with me is like this whole claim that they all died, that's got to go by the wayside as
Right.
well, right? Because it's just not attested.
The only critical, if I'm using a scalpel on my own guess, that
Mm-hmm.
suppose they stole the bodies, and then someone goes, yeah, but you're saying that people had visions. They themselves stole the body and then have visions. He's resurrected from the dead. In their mind, they'd say resurrection is physical body. So how did they go and knowingly steal the body? Maybe it's just a couple of them. Maybe it's not all of them. Maybe
Right.
there's a few amongst the group. I'm making up little tiny
Yeah.
things along the way, but let's just suppose all 12 stole the body. And then they still come along and someone has vision saying he's resurrected. What we mean by resurrection, what does Paul mean in 1 Corinthians by resurrection, is the question that I've had brilliant minds come on and say, yes, it's physical. They believe in a physical body, but it's also pneumatic, which is a philosophical concept. I've had Steve Mason on. I've had Dr. James Tabor on, like all these
Yep.
expert PhDs, and they're reading Paul to say what went into the ground did not come out. So, they're interpreting this transformation as a pneumatic one. When the seed goes in the ground, like it cast off the shell and something completely different comes out, and it's not physical, it's spiritual. It's not what we think of as flesh in the physical sense. And so I don't know how to navigate this, because they would say that Paul has a different understanding than probably what's being seen in Matthew and Luke when it starts to become more physical. Look, touch me, Phil. I'm eating
Right.
fish. And,
Exactly. Yep.
they're really nailing down that Phil, this guy, hey, Gnostics, hey, docetics who don't think he has a physical body. He has a physical body. And so what's going on here, man, in all of this literature?
And I think even with all what you're saying there is you've got scholars, you've got brilliant minds on all sides, to quote someone who shouldn't be quoted. But yeah, there's good people on all sides. But shouldn't it be more clear if
Right.
indeed, like if you want me who already has to get over my materialistic bent, shouldn't it be more clear? If you expect me to come along on your ride, like that's for me, that's just kind of the nail in the coffin. Is it's not clear. So as with the with we've seen with the Satan's guys, I think like a lot of times the apologists are just like, if they can find one plausible, and maybe that's what I'm doing, if they can find one plausible explanation, well, then they've got their out.
Right.
So anyway, sorry.
I think you said it well. It's not just that, it's not clear, but it's also, in my estimation, problematic. There's so many voices that we can show don't agree that I think are clearer. Not just like, did Paul mean this? And does that contradict these ideas in Luke and John? Because I've had some scholars who think there's continuity. Some say there's discontinuity, meaning the body was actually physical even in Paul, that the body physically resurrected according to Paul. And that's what resurrection means. Some of these scholars say not necessarily. Paul's framing it within a Jewish context, but he's also well established in Greek and Roman motifs. So he's marrying the two and finding a way in which he's writing this to the Corinthians, who would have understood this in a Gentile mind, not in a Jewish one in that way. So it is not clear enough, but it's also problematic.
And that it bears out in the book. Unfortunately, Gary, he's putting forth these, what I would say is these superficial cases for his thing, and basically you're telling me there's a chance. Almost like he's just I feel like the book is largely affirming what they want to believe, as opposed to really overwhelming me so that I'm just forced now to believe in a resurrection whether I want to or not. So
one last thing I have, and if you want, feel free, is that
go for it.
We were talking to Richard Miller before we went live, and he wasn't able to join us, but I was like, hey man, come hang out with us. And he said, well, one of the things they would do when he was going to college, because he went to the same college as William Lane Craig, or it was William Lane Craig's university or something. And he said they purposely will write massive tomes to kind of give off the impression, look at how much evidence and how sophisticated and complex and dense this is true, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? What did you want to comment on that? Do you feel
so I would say it's the opposite of dense. This is the ultimate fluffing up of what could have been a 300-page book is now suddenly 1,000 pages, so that you can be a little bit more referential, like just so you can be a little more comprehensive. No new points were made, but it was just more comprehensive. And again, there's several hundred pages for whatever reason on gospel defenses, which aren't part of the main core of the book, and a whole chapter on NDEs. So it's suddenly like, this isn't 1,000 pages on the resurrection. This is, 400 or 500 pages on the resurrection. And again, there's so much repetition that we've talked about. I need to, when I do my full review, I'll try and give some specific examples on this repetition. But again, it's not bad, but it's just, if you read it cover to cover, you realize, there's not as much here. There's a facade going on. So, yeah.
Anything else?
Was Richard the one who prompted William Lane Craig responding to us? Was that how that all kicked off? That's right.
Yes.
Right.
And by the way, we've got 814 people watching here on MythVision. Hit the like button right now, and also subscribe to Paulogia's live channel, as well as everybody knows about Paulogia. But the live channel, you're hanging out, you're taking questions, you're tackling apologetic stuff. I just wanted to say that you and I need to put something together in response back to William Lane Craig, because from what I understand, he responds to me in 2 episodes.
Yeah, he does. He dedicated. So for those who don't know, you interviewed Richard C. Miller about the state of whether apologists are respected by scholars, or that I don't know if that was the topic, but that it came up, and that caught William Lane Craig's eye. So William Lane Craig responded to you. And because I'm the only person on the planet who actually listens to William Lane Craig's podcast, I said, hey, Derek, come on. So Derek has been on my channel. we responded to that. And now William Lane Craig has dedicated two, not just one, but two full episodes because Derek really got under his skin. And I don't even think you've watched it yet.
I haven't even heard them.
But
I need to.
But anyway, so if you are interested in Derek and I doing, I guess, round 4 or 5 or whatever that would be in responseception, let us know. But
yeah, please let Paul know, because I don't want to be the beggar here with the shaking the cup. Let me join you.
My stipulation is you at least have to watch this thing first.
I do need to, and see if this is something I need to respond or want to. I'm pretty likely, at least I'll have something to present or give back.
For sure.
We might have a lot that I agree with him on, but I imagine there won't be in some cases, so it might be worth covering some of that.
Now, I did stumble upon a stream that you and Kip and Dr. Kip Davies and Dr. Josh Bowen did. You guys murdered apologetics. You canceled apologetics altogether. It was like a couple years ago, and I was like, man, it's still alive, Derek. You blew it.
I know. Which one was that?
It was just it. Of course, you can tell I legitimately watch Myth Vision all the time because that is what YouTube suggests to me. So it was a couple-year-old stream that you did with Kip and Josh. Okay. I think it was literally, it's called The Death of Apologetics or something.
Oh, yeah. And Josh and Kip have like the guns on the thumbnail or something. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely need to go back and check that one out again. And I think we were dealing with how problematic some of the stuff is in that ancient world. And we even had evangelical friend, I think he's evangelical, but he's not a fundamentalist, who stopped playing games trying to defend it and was like, it was bad. He tends to think God's progressively trying to better the world, almost like a post-millennialist-ish idea, or a progressive betterment of the world, and that he thinks that's what God's doing. But he admits the Bible has some archaic, terrible crap and horrible situation for women and slaves. And it's just, we went into all that. Okay, we got some supers, and I think we had a blast. There's so much we could talk about, Paul. You love this stuff.
Thank you for letting me vent for a while, though. That was fun. That was good, and we'll answer questions. If anyone else wants me to vent, you can ask a specific question. I have many more topics to vent because it's 1,000 pages, but let's get to.
Well, we'll get to supers. I just want to say, how's therapy going so far with 816 people on our side watching you?
The therapy, I've been taking my dog for long walks, and we've been, touching grass, as it were, except we're in Nova Scotia, so it's several feet of snow. But yeah, no, it's. I don't recommend that you read this in 2 weeks. It's a little bit much. It's a little bit much for that, but the more are coming. Anyway, I read it, so you don't have to, and there will be a formal review on my channel at some point. So.
Just in case people missed that, the Lamb of the world, Paul, died for our sins by reading 1,000 pages of this book. Ben, I'm not going to butcher the name. Thank you so much for the super chat. I wish IP and other apologists would actually take the time and read the books of those they refute. They can start by reading Dennis MacDonald work. Is this on my channel? I think this is on mine.
It looks like yours.
Okay, yep. I can tell. I can see. Okay, there's a little chain mark when it's yours, and then it's cool.
For those who don't know, we decided at the very last second. Well, this whole thing is last second, but I'm like, hey, let's do it on both channels at the same time. And so you and I are pioneering new technology that lets us do that. But forgive us if we're not 100% up on who's from which channel. Forgive us.
Yeah, forgive us in advance. I don't know if they've read Dennis MacDonald's work. He gave me a call earlier when I was on my way to the gym about his new Q book coming out, and then he's got another book, Synoptic Epistles. He creates an interesting hypothetical discussion between the gospel authors, and they're oftentimes arguing with each other, not in a positive way, because of what one did with their gospel. And why did you do that? And so he gives this hypothetical discussion where Dennis MacDonald's actually interpreting the gospel to the other gospel author as to why they did what they did with their text. It's a really It's a genius book. I can't wait to show that. But the Q book is actually out today. It's live on Amazon, so people can get that. And he's trying to defend the idea of Q because so many people are getting away from it, especially in the online world. They're just like, if we don't have it, just stop. Don't even try to hypothesize that we had some type of reconstruction of Q, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway,
I'm going to test just me personally, my personal journey with Dennis MacDonald. I didn't buy anything that I heard. I heard about his theories, and no one ever said it to me in a way that was convincing.
right.
And then I actually read it. So like Dennis is one, I think that the secondhand versions of it don't do him justice. Like I actually had to get the book again on the shelf over there, and it was like all of a sudden this is obvious. So I'm 100% agree. If an apologist hasn't actually read him and has only heard it secondhand, they're missing.
Yeah, and even if they disagree, cool. I think
Right.
there's good reason to think something's going on. You
Mhm.
know, you can I think he's wrong in several examples he might bring up, or at least I'm not gonna say
Right.
he's wrong, but I'm not persuaded that
Yeah.
that's what's going on in some of them. But some of them, man, that they tend to really push me over the edge, and it looks plausible, looks very likely. Thank you so much, Ben. Gnostic informant in the house. So much
Woo.
for minimal facts. Paul, did you ever see the speech that Habermas gave to some church about there being no sources mentioning Alexander the Great for 400 years? It's unbearable. It is unbearable to watch.
Yeah, they often accuse, they meaning apologists in general, often accuse some of our scholar friends of being not as rigorous when they're talking as when they're doing their academic writing. Apologists do the same thing because I know Gary knows that, you know, that there's sources mentioning Alexander the Great. And I in the book, for example, he very much qualifies that, well, I'm talking about specifically about literary biographies, not like inscriptions and coin. Like he
Right.
throws all these caveats out that dismiss all the obvious things. So again, but also I'm not as all buttoned up live. Like today, I probably said a few things that were slightly not the way I would have worded them if I was scripted. So I don't begrudge them that. Someone like Gary, who's been doing this for 60 years, though, yeah, that's bordering on irresponsible. But
Yeah. Thank you so much, Neil, because I know Neil definitely is looking for stuff like that.
yeah,
Alex, thank you so much for the super chat. I
thank you,
appreciate
Alex.
that. Mr. Warlight, question. Acts is often used for dating Paul's letters. So what do you make of verse 21:20? Paul is mistaken for a man in a revolt that occurred some time ago. Said revolt occurred 60 AD, and some time ago could be post-war.
Do we need
Let's
to look it up?
get Acts 21:20.
I did memorize Acts at one point, but I don't remember.
Tell everybody that while we're getting this. That's another story, I think.
Well, so when I was a teenager, I was involved in international Bible quizzing. So literally each year we would memorize one or more books of the Bible and compete on them. I wasn't amazing, like I wasn't all-star level for most of those years, but I did like so I memorized Acts, I memorized John, I memorized Hebrews, First, Second Peter, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. So but Matthew was my year. Matthew was the year I earned a bunch of money for Bible school scholarships by memorizing it. So anyway, blah, blah, blah.
You're infallible, man. Just keep it real.
No.
Okay,
Also, weirdly, I memorized it in NIV 84, which is like a translation no one uses anymore. So when I quote things, everyone's like squinting at me. It's like, that's not quite right. But,
I don't see what's going on in this passage.
21:20. So when I heard this, they said, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews believed, and all of them were zealous for the law? Is that what you're seeing? 21.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing, and I'll share the screen if we need to, but I don't.
Acts is often used. So I'm also not convinced that Acts is used for dating Paul's letters. Do you find that to be true? I have a video. I have a video coming out on Pauline authorship, and I feel like those letters are all date like if you want to accept the story, he died in like 63, 64. So all the letters have to be dated Like they just squish the dating of all those letters to before 63 just because that's when he died. Like it seems like that's the major justification for most people. Do you see something different in your travels?
Yeah, I don't know anything about
Okay.
Acts being used to date Paul's letters.
Yeah.
But then again, I've never had to ask that question when I was
Mm.
speaking to experts on Acts.
I
And
will say,
so,
Mr. Warlight, I'm going to look this up because you have me curious. So sadly, I don't have any more insight. But
yeah, sorry. I really wish I did.
yeah.
I'm seeing Sedreville. Okay, so yeah. Thank you so much. Gray's 174. How can Jesus be buried in a tomb when he doesn't even have a physical body?
Is Gray a mythicist?
I would imagine.
So I'm what I'm call a methodological historicist. Like, so for the sake of my discussions with Christians, I just adopt historicity. I personally think there's adequate reason. It solves more problems than not that there's a kernel of historical truth. That doesn't bother me. But also, just when you're talking to a Christian, if you go full mythicist on them, they kind of stop listening, and then I can't have good conversations. So it's more of a pragmatic. I'm not saying like people definitely have good reasons to think that way, but it's not my endeavor.
Thank you. Yeah, Grays, that's a docetic position, I guess you'd say.
All right.
This is from your channel, Michael
Super
Gartner.
sticker. All right. Thank you for the sticker, Michael.
Thank you. You got a new member, it looks. Oh, no, member for 9 months.
Oh, so when you're a member, you get a free super chat. So that's where I think where that came from. Erman thinks that Mary Magdalene plays a part. Oh, we talked about this. Let me know, Bernard, if we didn't cover this well enough, but I think we kind of got that covered.
I thought we did as well.
Yeah.
And you're not saying she doesn't play some role in the early church.
Oh,
you're
for
just
sure.
Saying in the initial, she's not necessary. She's just an added element.
There's no new explanatory power that we get by adding her as one of the witnesses, I find. But I'm open to someone suggesting to me what new thing it would explain.
Thank you so much. Goodwill Thinking. How do you like them apples? I appreciate that. Super sticker. Appreciate it. Caleb Jackson. Even as a Christian, I would say history alone isn't enough to prove the resurrection. Other contemporary evidence of miracles is needed.
And I would say that is a conceit that Gary makes in his book, is that like unless he can start you with supernatural, that he can't overwhelm you with his history. The other weird conceit he makes is that you can't, from a pure, if you only rely on history, he can't get you to resurrection either. He actually needs you to bring in philosophy and some natural science and some of that kind of stuff, because from a purely historical basis, he admits he can't get you there, which is refreshing.
I mean, let's be very fair here. How often have you and I in the Christian movement, whatever brand, free will or predestinarian, it doesn't matter. I'm just throwing out the two different opposing models of soteriology, that there still needs for them to see it and to believe it. There needs to be the quickening of the spirit. There needs to be at least you being brought to life by God's spirit in some sense. So it's not just, to me, contemporary evidence. I would go a little step further in agreeing with that. But that evidence, I would ask that it happened to you, that you're not, or at least someone that's right there where you're involved in it and you see it. It's hard for me just trusting accounts on something that is that, I guess you'd say unbelievable, or very difficult to say that actually happened, when we don't see this happen on the regular. Because how do we live our day? Like if you told me, man, I won the lottery last week, and I go, oh, really? Would you win like 1,000? No. I mean, like the $2.2 billion lottery I won last week. I got some questions. Yep. I need to see that scratch off. I need to see you on the news. I need to see, I need more.
Yeah. Than just your word on that. I need you to log into your bank account and show me the
numbers.
The deposit, right? Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah. Good enough.
Yeah. Sorry. Mark, thank you so much for that super chat on Paul's.
Ooh, Apology is live, Apology is pre-recorded, and Apology is animated. The new Holy Trinity. That explains the Trinity just as well as any other Trinity explanation that I've heard.
I
There,
think
the
this.
analogies aren't good. It's at least as good as the water one, right?
You have 3 channels?
No, I don't. But
Okay.
actually, well, I do technically. I started a 3rd channel this week, but we can talk about that elsewhere.
See, he is the
I started a
Trinity.
Spanish channel this week. So.
Awesome.
Yep.
Jay-Z, love your channels. Hope to see Dr. Jennifer Bird on your channel eventually, Paul.
For sure. I see that Jennifer posted today that she's coming on Myth Vision.
Tomorrow we're going live to talk about her life.
Jennifer got on my radar. She's delightful. First of all, just as a person, from what I've seen on interviews, and then she's smart like crazy. So she only got on my radar like a month or 2 ago, but yeah, definitely would love to have her for sure.
Thank you, Jay-Z. Mark Bilby in the house. Thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Habermas claims all scholars accept all of Galatians and 1 Corinthians as authentic. Wrong. 1 Corinthians, resurrection, ascension, wasn't in Marcion's apostolos. The Galatians 1 through 2 revelation likely was. Habermas should debate Vincent on this. So Vincent's a scholar who I don't know what they would have in common. Right. That's how different the scholarship is. Like, this is the problem, right? Not that that's a problem for Vincent, or it's like brilliant minds who are far smarter than you and me combined on this stuff. They know the languages. They're methodical and meticulous. They're like coming up with so many different possible outcomes to this, and they're trying their best. And they disagree with the neighbor in their own office expert who also specializes in either the same field or in a field similar and related, and they disagree. And it's like, what the heck, everybody? How do we get to the actual answer?
And then I had a scholar comment on one of my videos this week saying, you know that not everyone agrees when Marcion was written, right? I'm like, no, is that not a thing that we don't like that? Oh, now it might be a couple hundred years later. Shoot, like that. Oh man.
Well, there's some who probably do that, and then there's some who think he might be earlier, and then some who think that the canonical literature is later than what the typical. And this is like not. I wouldn't say this is the majority. This is just there's some who think that the canonical material, like I think Vincent would say, is later in 2nd century, and it's reacting to Marcion's gospel. So you're going to find elements in these gospels that seem to be reacting to the theology of Marcion. And so there are academics trying to reconstruct Marcion's gospel, and there are various forms of that reconstruction because the experts are trying to reconstruct something we don't have, but we have various quotes. And man, and you know what's interesting? You can go to Bart, who takes the traditional approach that Marcion, is after what we see in some of the canonical material. But even Bart goes, well, over the few centuries after the 1st century, right, they're reacting and responding, and scribes are adding into this canonical material reactions and responses to Marcion. So the canonical material people are reading today as what is being taught is actually, do you see what's going on here, man? Like, how do we know? We need the Holy Ghost.
At some point when I'm making my videos, again, this kind of goes to my, I love all this stuff, and Derek seems like every couple of days is exposing me to some new thing that I didn't know. But I keep all that in my heart, and I ponder it in my heart, Derek, instead of pragmatically, because I really want to have good conversations with Christians.
Right.
A lot of this, it's a little bit of a bridge too far to open with. So
I get it.
I try to accept what I can and go with that. Yeah.
I don't blame you. Just pray on it, okay?
Trey Bob in my heart.
Trey Bob 31. What is your view on the book called Acts of Pilate? Is it from early Rome? Thanks for the super chat.
So Acts of Pilate.
I don't know much about it.
Sorry?
I said, I don't know much about it. I know Dennis McDonald has talked about this on an interview with me before.
And I can't say that I've heard anyone talk specifically about what where it was written, so I don't know that we could say for sure that it was, Rome versus Athens versus who knows where. The little bit I know about it is that it's very anti-Jewish.
That makes sense. I mean, clearly,
and so that it's basically this notion of absolving Pilate, and it wouldn't surprise. I guess it would make sense to be written in Rome because it is largely, it seems like a book specifically written to absolve Rome any culpability in the death of Jesus. Like that seems to be. And if I remember correctly, that's the one where Jesus does appear to Pilate. If I remember correctly.
I have not read it myself.
I haven't either, so I'm going secondhand. But
yeah,
early Rome would make. Let me put it this way: I don't know about early. I don't think it probably was pretty late, but Rome, I guess, makes sense.
I'm looking at it here. Over 500.
It's like third or fourth century, isn't it? Something like that.
It's later. It says it could be as early as 160 AD.
Okay.
It's Gospel of Nicodemus is another way to call it, or at least it's in the vein of the Gospel of Nicodemus. I believe. In the next,
sorry, Bob, that we don't have any firsthand insight for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on that at all, no. And I'm not an expert on any of this, but I have better knowledge of other things. Mr. Warlight again says Acts 21:28 mistyped the verse. Okay. That'll do it. Okay, 28. So now we're talking, shouting, fellow Israelites, help us. This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place. I think he's talking about Paul. Yeah, Paul's arrest. Yeah. We need a comment on that. What are your thoughts about that verse?
I mean, so if I remember the super chat correctly, he was thinking that because this must have happened very late.
Let me pull that one back up just because I don't want to butcher that. Yeah. Just remember where we're at. Okay, he says Acts is often used for dating Paul's letters. So what do you make of verse 21:28? Now that we know, Paul is mistaken for a man in a revolt that occurred some time ago. Said revolt occurred 68.
Right. Okay. So let me now. Acts 21 is well into, like, Paul's had at least is in his third missionary journey by this point. I think he's at least on his second missionary journey at this point. So Paul's been a Christian for, I think, long enough for them to say some time ago and mean Paul. Acts takes place over multiple years.
Where's the some time ago? I don't see it. I'm looking at the text.
21, 28.
Shouting, fellow Israelites, help. This is NIV, of course, but this is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place.
They had previously seen, if you look at 29, they'd previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him in. So yeah, again, so that's background, but it doesn't mean
right.
Mr. Warlight, just, I don't know which chat you're in, but you don't have to super chat again, but let us, if you can clarify where the some time ago is coming from.
I'm trying to keep an eye on that. I'll say one comment that I see, and this is based on an Acts scholar I've interviewed. The Acts tends to portray Jews over and over as antagonists in a very, what I would say, Mike Winger propagandistic manner. And what ends up happening is, I notice I said Mike Winger because he had the video. It was like propaganda. Yep. But seriously, it is to get Christians to be viewed as innocent, even though they're being charged and they're guilty of everything over and over and over. They're being charged and accused and all that. They're being seen innocent for the Theophilus, whoever this person is that's this gospel's being written for, and Acts seems to be also being written for, is, hey, look, man, we're innocent. We're not guilty. And over and over and over, the scholars I've talked to say the Jews are the ones who constantly accuse. And I also hear that this kind of Gentiles don't need to follow the law, they don't need to practice Torah, these kind of things. And that maybe they're going beyond Paul a little. I don't know, but Paul does say they don't need to circumcise.
I
And
found I found where he was, by the way. I think he mistyped
please,
again. It's 38, 2138.
2138. Aren't you the Egyptian? Well, the Egyptian, Steve Mason. I've had experts on Josephus talk about the Egyptian, which they called him that because all the other rebels were typically Jews in this time period. There was a Samaritan, and they just called him the Samaritan, and there was an Egyptian. They called him what he was because the only people you had to name were the Jews, because there were so many of them floating around. They needed to identify them. But if you were the Egyptian who led a revolt, they'd call you that. But what is in light of that, do you speak Greek? He replied. Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists or, whatever out into the wilderness some time ago? And so I've had some people who think that this is evidence that Paul was actually secretly the Egyptian, but I don't go that route.
But also, I don't know that this affects timing of the letters. Just again, in that
I could have just gone one super chat down, and I'd have known that they mistyped it again.
Rats!
I'm an idiot. Sorry. So did you have a comment?
No, but that was actually good for me to because I did my act search. That was good for me.
I'm glad you did that. Yeah. But I don't get what the relevant is. This like somehow dating it? Well, this is where scholars would say, when did the Egyptian lead a revolt? And if Acts is claiming to be taking place, let's say 38 to 40-ish, or that's where these kind of years are happening, that this text is supposedly occurring. When did the Egyptian? That'd be the question I'd need to know from a historian who's aware of when the Egyptian led a revolt based on what we have in Josephus. But there's scholars that make the case, whether you buy it or not, that Acts is aware of Josephus's writings.
I buy it. I actually am on that train.
I am too, but I know there are some who want to say maybe they had a common source, or maybe it was just well known and people. But I tend to go that route and think there's something going on.
I also want to take back something I said earlier, just in case it's misunderstood. So people definitely do use Acts to decide what order Paul wrote his letters in, and because it talks about there's a bit of clarifying of the various missionary journeys in Acts. More
that makes sense.
Letters. So they absolutely do say what order, but everyone pretty much agrees that they had to be written pretty much between like 52 and 62, and it's very tough to slice it thinner than that, shall we say.
And I know there are some who would disagree with that. I guess you'd say the majority of
well, I'm talking about an evangelical. I'm talking about someone who absolutely believes all the stuff, right? So
right.
Yeah. No, I think Second Thessalonians was written closer to 90 than
sometime later.
Yeah.
Michael Beverly. So posterior and on ahistorical Jesus. I mean, Paul, you're saying it's not 100% right in your mind.
Ahistorical Jesus? Is he asking like what percentage I would give on whether Jesus was a myth? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, I guess that seems to be the point. Like, how confident are you? Just guessing?
So this is not for nothing, but I feel like Luke, the author of Luke and the author of Matthew, wouldn't have had to work so hard to get Jesus born in Bethlehem if it was entirely a mythical figure, because then they could have just said he was born in Bethlehem. But I feel like there was enough of a kernel that he was a Nazarene, and that was just like ingrained, that whatever nugget of actual history there is. And I know that's super thin. So I don't know. I would give it, for me, I don't know, maybe it's 75-25, like 75% there was a dude that in some way inspired some of the legends,
Mhm.
and 25% that it was entirely made up. But
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the super
I don't know.
chat.
Are you way off from me on that, or
Oh, I'm not answering that question. No, I'm just
okay?
kidding.
Then fair enough.
No, no, no. Uh, it totally is subjectively throwing numbers out there without putting
Yeah,
up.
I don't know. I don't know. So
I
I'll probably
lean
get
that
myself
there was
wrong.
a guy. I would
Yeah.
say 70-30. I tend to lean that for several reasons, but I could be completely wrong, right? I
Yep.
always say this, but it tends to me that yeah, you got guys, complete legends being built up, and they did a damn good job, I think, of making sure Jesus checks off all the boxes for this legendary stuff, from birth narratives to his miraculous activities to exorcisms to the list goes on and on. And I see other figures who have similarities like that in the sense that they do these things, and we would say those are legends as well. I just don't jump to the he was a myth. It doesn't make as much sense whole cloth to me as the other position, even though it's plausible. It could be, but I just don't go that
I
route.
would just say again, I don't think that the myths, even though like the super, sometimes it's super compelling about how they interpret passages, I still don't see how it has better explanatory power than there was a Life of Brian style guy.
Right.
So I don't know. Anyway.
Blessed are the cheese makers.
Hmm.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, sir. Dr. Andy, wouldn't Peter put a grief induced illusion into perspective and subsequently show some kind of doubt in what he really saw? Why would all the others believe such a miraculous claim?
So I guess the question is why, if he was primed, if he was absolutely primed to be wanting this to be true, um, but we also, frankly, don't know that he didn't later kind of walk it back, because
Hmm.
once the cat's out of the bag, the cat's out of the bag. And why would others believe such a miraculous claim? Well, every Christian today is a Christian not because they saw Jesus, but because they believed someone who told them. So if Peter was convinced, all that all the explanatory power you need is that he himself was convinced, and then it's exactly the same as every other Christian now. Um, he told it in a convincing way, and it doesn't. I don't see it as any weirder than you talking to your neighbor down the street and they start believing that Jesus rose from the dead. It's just the time difference doesn't matter. I don't know. Am I missing something?
I feel like the only thing that's missing into this account is that they'll I could imagine dreams, visions of people actually seeing Jesus, they say. Even today, they're having these experiences, and then therefore they're like, you'll hear about it in other countries or in other religious groups, like Muslims who have a dream about Jesus, and then they come to discover his true identity as the real Son of God, and they left Islam, or they have to hide that they're not Muslim anymore, and they believe in Jesus and stuff. But they tell their testimony one day when they finally can, and they say, "I had a dream one night," or these kind of things. Because, but as far as being there, supposedly witnessing this stuff happening, none of us were there. And unless you ask the Australian Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
who claims to be Jesus, and then he was actually crucified in the first century because he is Jesus. You could ask these guys, but
Post bereavement, is wildly varied. Like, so everyone experiences it differently. But I've talked to people who've had, just because it comes up. It's 15% of people have had it. They like it's only their Western mindset that lets them, like, it's only because they don't believe in a supernatural that they recognize that, okay, that wasn't the thing, because for them it was very visceral,
hmm.
right? Like, these things can seem super real. So I this whole notion that we can, I know I'm psychoanalyzing in a way to say that that's a possible explanation, but for someone to posit, well, no one's ever been fooled by such a thing. Uh,
what
I don't see that.
what with this question and what your position is, I find interesting Matthew chapter 28, and I'll read it without pulling it up just to bring the point. I think that's interesting. The Great Commission
Hmm.
passage. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go post resurrection. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And
Mm.
it's to me, there's a doubting tradition of the Gospels right out the gate. What is this? Is this a kernel of historical memory that many of the early disciples actually really did doubt, even the most dear followers of Jesus? Because that's what Thomas is, a story of overcoming that doubt, supposedly. So, what is that? Or is this completely literary? And what is the goal of saying that many of those who were there with him, and he said, go to the mountain, went, they saw something, they worshiped him, but some doubted? How are you going to doubt if it's clear what you're looking at? Is Jesus resurrected? I don't know. Anyway, that's just my thoughts.
I agree. Yeah. Love
Okay.
it.
Michael,
All right.
we'll get a couple more. We need to wrap
Okay.
it up here to
Oh,
let you go,
perfect.
because I know that you have to go.
I
You
do have
have
a stop. Yeah.
and you got to prepare. Michael Beverly, thank you. Dr. Bird is great. She's coming to talk to me March 5th. I just finished her book, Permission Granted, a couple nights ago. Time for you two to write a book. This.
Michael, all I want to say is I actually watched your stream with Mike Lycona the other day, and that was fun. I thought you did a good job with that, so well done. So I'm sure you'll do a great job with Dr. Bird. And yeah, I agree. Dr. Bird is great.
Thank you so much, Michael. Greg Royce, forgive me if I butchered that. I've seen your vids on Marcion, but haven't seen this question. Could Trinitarian doctrine be a response to docetism?
That's you.
I don't know. I honestly don't know that answer. I know that most of the academics in the field say there's a continual evolving idea of how to address this issue. And not all Christians thought Trinitarian, obviously. That's like blunt. Everybody knows that, or you should. But I don't know if it would be a direct response to docetism. I like talking to people like my buddy Neil will try to find stuff in the Greek world, or like, is there Trinity concepts that are established and that is where they lift it from? But there's no way to know with certainty what ultimately, in my opinion, influenced coming up with that philosophical model the way that they've constructed it, especially in light of much of the material, like Bart Ehrman talked about how Jesus became God. Much of the material in the biblical text does contradict the notion of what later the doctrine of Trinity that becomes the creed is. And so later ideas usurp earlier doctrines that were the truth. And then those truths became heretical over time, according to many of the scholars I've talked to.
And of course, just the nature of things is that the scribes didn't copy out the things that they were later considered heretical. So unfortunately, the heretical writings that you might be writing creating a polemic for, unfortunately, we'll never get to see.
Well, I'm saying even in the canon, there are fossils
for sure
of ideas that seem to be contrary to Trinity, but in light of other passages, the Christians rationalized and went, "Oh, well, we found it here in our text, and so the Trinity is still valid, even though you can find a text that says Jesus is not on the same level as his Father, or he is praying to God, but he is God," and they've found ways to maneuver and play gymnastics. Anyway,
agree.
sorry.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
T99 says, thank you for both of your channels. God becoming a man to be a perfect sacrifice to himself is dizzying. No question, just thanks.
Thank you, T99.
Thank you. One more mistype for the LOLs here. Acts 666.
Is that even? I not many.
I'm gonna
chapters
see.
or
Oh yeah.
long.
Check. It says, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Hallelujah. I appreciate that verse that doesn't exist.
Acts 666 is thank you for the super chat. That's what it says in the original Greek.
Yeah. My son actually did that. He was little, couldn't read at the time. We asked him what his fortune cookie said. We were at a restaurant and he's so serious. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hand. It was the cutest thing. I loved it.
Amazing. Awesome.
William Arens, thank you for the final super chat and being here for such a long time and being there with Paula Gia. William Arens, God does not talk to humans as he did to Adam, Moses, and Job, nor is a resurrected Christ among us, but believers can feel connected through the Holy Spirit, whose presence can replace that absence.
Okay. Well, thank you, William. I'm sure that's what you believe, and I think Derek and I actually are both. We kind of addressed this before. That is the ingredient that we are missing in terms of our belief. I feel like we have loaded up at least as much knowledge as should be minimally needed to become a mere Christianity Christian. But what we are missing is that Holy Spirit. So if anyone in the audience, I'm always fine with anyone in the audience praying for me as long as they don't tell me. So feel free
Oh, so it
to.
offends you when people tell you
No, it
that?
doesn't offend me, but I feel like you're supposed to pray in secret, like it's
Oh,
what
I
the
got
Bible
you.
commands. You're not supposed to. So, and I also, yeah, there's just performance weirdness
I don't
there.
know why I thought maybe he's offended. He doesn't want people to
No,
tell
I'm
him.
not. I'm actually not offended. Like when people say I'm going to pray for you, I'm like, in your worldview, that means a lot. So thank
Right.
you.
That means I respect you, or
Yeah,
usually, or
exactly.
it could
So,
mean I'm gonna pray for you.
well, it could, it could. But I agree. Like I think probably the older I get, the more I'm realizing, man, the ingredient I'm missing is that Holy Spirit, that William Lane Craig's, feeling of warmth and coziness that I just don't have.
I so appreciate you, Paul, being my friend and being a fellow seeker of trying to figure things out with the best you can. Is there anything you're working on right now that you can tell our 769
Mm,
people to support you to?
boy, well, no, it's as Derek said. I think I had a great video the other day on with responding to Mike Winger on the Satan's Guide to the Bible. I have a long list of guests that are coming up, but I don't like to jinx it with spilling the beans. So just I subscribe and stay tuned. And Paul G Live is another channel where I like to have a little more relaxed fun, just like this. So both channels are good, and obviously Derek, your friendship means a lot to me as well. I think we can be brothers and iron sharpening iron and all that kind of good stuff. So appreciate you.
Absolutely. In fact, I didn't want to tell you this till now, but you and me both share the same father. Apollo snuck into our mother's bedrooms years back, and we're actually half brothers. Didn't want,
Mm.
didn't want to spoil
That's
the good news.
that's where I guess I'm older because I got the name Apollo Gia.
Exactly. See,
Hmm.
uh, yeah. Also, you have a Patreon. People can help you
I do,
there.
yeah, and like Derek, we try and eke out a meager living, much as Paul did. When he was a tent maker. So
Right.
those who fight the gospel should make their living fighting the gospel. I guess I don't know. I don't know how to warp that verse, but yes, no. If you're support both of us if you like what we do, because it makes a huge difference, and because we want to get information out there to all of you. So appreciate it.
I will say, just on my end, as we're wrapping this up, I am postponing our tour that we were going to do over in Israel
Mm,
till everything is fully calmed down and everything is
makes
over in
sense.
terms of the war. And the scholars also who were going along with me want to do that as well. So probably spring, fall 2025, giving it plenty of time to know that things are good and stable. And also, I'm potentially interested in putting together some type of cruise, like
Ooh.
not we need to go to this place and sightsee, but like a possible conference cruise type scenario where skeptics and scoundrels like us can join and kick our feet off, enjoy the social life of connecting with other people, and have potential scholarly conference discussions. We can figure out things, but wouldn't it be cool to do that? Not just going to like Texas and going to like a 3 day, 2 day hotel conference kind of thing, but on a cruise for myth fishing.
That if we can get it on an arc, all the better.
Exactly. We got to
Yep.
get on the boat because the
Yep.
world's going to flood again. And I'm sure
Perfect.
there's several other things coming up. So stay tuned and thank you, everybody. Do you want me to play an outro or do we just need to go?
We just sign off.
All right. Love y'all. Like the
Later.
video, subscribe.